And together, we will move mountains. And if they don't hear our message, then we'll just do it over and over and over and over 1,000 times again for you.
And I'll rise up, I'll rise like the day, I'll rise up in spite of you. I will rise, we will rise, we will rise, we will rise.
Hello, my name is Michelle Zabel, and I'm an Assistant Dean at the University of Maryland School of Social Work and the proud director of the Institute for Innovation and Implementation. So this year of working virtually has necessitated some really creative approaches to conferences. For us, we've spread the Training Institute workshops over the last 9 months, hosting just a few workshops each month. And I want to thank you for joining in these discussions and participating each month. This summer, we're continuing the Training Institutes in a way that will allow you to take us wherever you go. And I am hopeful that you are able to take a break and get away safely. We're going to be recording our summer workshops and releasing them each month so you can watch them anytime during the month that works for you. These workshops are going to be on a wide range of topics, all focused around strengthening your skills as you support children, youth, and families. A quick note, some presentation reference information and graphics that are embedded within the presentations may not be fully explained within the audio, but all of the presentations are accessible to download, as well as the resources and handouts that correspond to each workshop, and I encourage you to do that. Thank you for listening to the audio recordings of our summer workshops for Training Institutes Live. While you're enjoying these summer months and workshops, we'll be planning and working towards future Training Institutes when hopefully we can all see each other in person. Take care, enjoy your summer. Thanks.
Good afternoon. Welcome and thank you for joining us to discuss how we can create the context for best practices. Implementation of best practices requires more than simply just learning a new model. Several organizational practices have been found to be instrumental to ensure success. We will share how when there is an intentional focus on developing and implementing a quality improvement system that engages the entire organization, it creates the foundational conditions for organizations to be highly effective and high performing. Organizations are better positioned to meet the needs of the individuals served because they are staying on top of trends, increasing knowledge, refining practices, which all helps to promote delivery of best practices. A lens to continuous quality improvement ensures accountability and credibility to system partners, including funders, regulators, and the families and individuals that are served. My name is Ruby Goyal-Carkeek, and I'm the Senior Vice President at the Alliance COA, and I'm joined here with my colleagues, Kerry Deas, who's the Director of Training and QI Initiatives. Kerry and I are also pleased and honored to have Rachel McClements, the Chief Operating Officer at 5 Acres, join us and share insights and strategies from the field.
Thanks, Ruby. We're excited to be here talking with all of you about the context for creating best practices. And so that really starts off with thinking about what does quality mean to you? It's really essential for your organization to define exactly what quality is and what it means to you and your organization. So as champions of best practices, we really must challenge our organizations to continuously assess, how we handle operations and how we provide services. So words such as efficiency, details, significance, distinction, accountability, they really represent some of the different elements of quality's defining characteristics. So quality is really about efficiency and maximizing the use of resources, but it's also about storytelling, right? And what we share about our organization and how we amplify the voices of those who seek out our services. It's also about advocacy at the individual, organizational, and system levels in favor of the work that we do in and around communities. So these concepts are really important because of the value we place on them, right? And the relationships that we cultivate. So equity and inclusion efforts really highlight the need for supporting and creating access to opportunities. And all of this is a part of quality.
And prioritizing equity as part of quality includes targeted universalism, something Kerry just mentioned as what does quality mean to you. It's being inclusive of the needs of both dominant and marginal groups, of paying particular attention to the situation of the marginal groups. And this includes a disaggregation of data, looking at access to opportunity and the outcomes, and including measures of how disparity can be reduced. Marginal groups can show as overrepresented in response systems such as child welfare, but also be underrepresented in healthcare due to many factors, including access to care. So you want to be sure to analyze and determine the root cause of that disparity and determine what you can do to combat that.
So it can feel pretty overwhelming, can't it? Where on earth do you start, and how can you prevent yourself from becoming so overwhelmed? For my organization, our mission statement is to promote safety, well-being, and permanency for children and their families by building on their strengths and empowering them within their communities. So questions that we asked ourselves was, okay, that's a great mission statement, but how do we know we are doing what we say we do? How do we know that our children are safe? How do we know that our children leave us living with loving permanent families? And another question that you might want to ask is, why would anybody want to work for this agency? Do you provide work that you are proud of? Our clients do have a choice, albeit limited, but what would they choose? When we fly, we often hear the words, we realize you have a choice in airlines and thank you for choosing, whoever it might be. And I guess a question that we might want to ask is, do you feel the same way about your clients? Do they feel that way about your agency? Are you providing them with high quality service? And more importantly, how do you know? You can even look at this from a donor perspective. Why would a donor give money to your agency? From a governance perspective, donor board members are often drawn to organizations that are close to their heart. How can you let them know that what you're doing and the work that you do is actually what you're saying you do? Why should they choose you, for example, over similar organizations that are out there serving the same kind of population? And finally, a third question might be, given that there's a lot of services that are paid for by third parties, and they don't sit in the room with you and your client, they can't see directly what it is that you're doing, how do they know that you're providing a good quality service? How can you prove, if you will, to your payer sources that you provide that?
Rachel raises some really important questions for consideration, and I want to build on that. So it's really critical to infuse quality improvement into the culture of your organization. So you really do need to ask, why is quality improvement important? You know, we provided some reasons, such as it provides a systematic approach to orchestrating purposeful change. It's a commitment to embracing uncertainty. It prioritizes the needs of multiple stakeholder groups through an equity lens, right? So having a quality improvement system doesn't mean you will have all the answers. It means that the organization is committed to working collaboratively to figure things out, especially in times of uncertainty. And as I mentioned, asking the critical questions in terms of looking and working on the needs of multiple stakeholder groups through an equity lens, it's really going to yield meaningful data that contributes to equitable outcomes as it relates to the populations that you serve. So quality improvement really isn't just an add-on or a quick fix. It's not an easy thing to implement. So thoughtful consideration to how the organization will live and breathe quality improvement is really critical and essential. So with some of those things in mind that I just mentioned, quality improvement is about creating a system to measure organizational performance and continuously using data that emerges to inform practice. So in order to create a holistic approach, the organization really should establish a philosophy. This is where the embodiment of organizational learning is so important. To support individuals and families on their journeys, it is even more essential for the organization to view itself as an instrument of change. And so learning can be a vehicle for developing and refining adaptive leadership skills. And that's not just at the senior leadership level, that's at all levels of the organization, right? So the organization really needs to explore answers to two questions. How do we create an environment that values and emphasizes learning and interpersonal and organizational growth? And what is our overall collective vision? So effectiveness is at the center of organizational practice. So data really has to be routinely gathered and analyzed for internal learning and redesign. Organizations that support such a culture of learning and growth are more likely to be successful in implementing a quality improvement system. Department goals and objectives really should be grounded in this collective vision. And remember, quality improvement culture really embodies learning and growth. So let's hear from 5 Acres, Rachel, in terms of how they foster learning and growth environment in their organization.
Okay, so one of the things that we do as an organization, and Kerry just mentioned that it doesn't just come from the top, but has to be incorporated into almost your DNA of your organization. How do you create that culture of learning and growth? Some of the things that we do, and these are just examples that you might want to use in your agency, we created a tuition reimbursement program. We started off with that of just providing it for the clinical staff, but we've also incorporated into our supports as well. So for example, any individual who wants to go back to school or is doing some kind of course that would benefit the work that we do, then we will pay for some of their tuition to that. So we have individuals perhaps who are going back for their masters, but we also will have individuals, for example, from the IT department who are learning about cybersecurity. We also will have an incredibly flexible training department. We recently brought in a new contract, and as a result of that contract, we incorporated into it some dollars that would actually be included in the training component. So we saw the value in that. Our training department works throughout our agency. We are aware that within that training department, we have specific designated training groups. We have a very unique program at our agency, and we actually have a training program that is designed just for that one unique group. Our training department also as well is credentialed to offer CEs. And if you're an agency and you have a lot of licensed mental health practitioners, that can be a real added value for you as an organization to be able to provide that for them for licensure. We also as well offer in-house evidence-based training so that they can become credentialed in various evidence-based practices and don't have to go out and get that on their own. This is something that I think adds a huge value to clinicians, especially depending on the type of work that you do, that you can offer them a credential within various EBPs. We also will do an annual training needs survey. And that is where we actually ask all of our staff, what do you feel you need more training on? And I think that what that does is it begins to give back to the staff to send a message of we value your curiosity, we value your learning. And as a result of the training needs survey, we then as an agency will put on various trainings. And one of the things that we also do is an annual clinical conference where we invite external persons to come in and talk to us about whatever it might have been that the staff themselves have asked for additional training on.
You can really see from what Rachel shared that there's multiple ways that you can foster a culture of learning and growth in the organization. And so weaving that throughout all aspects of the work that you do. And you'll see that as we continue to go on. So now if you're new to creating a quality improvement system, or you want to revise the system that's currently in place, maybe you're like, this is the point where we kind of need to pivot, or you really want to adopt a particular quality improvement model. We provided some examples of commonly known change models here. And so some of those examples include Lean Six Sigma, total quality management, Kotter's 8-step model of change, the ADKAR model of change, Stephen Covey's 7 habits model, and results count path to equity. But we're not necessarily endorsing any of these particular models that's here, or emphasizing that organizations must adopt a formal model for quality improvement. In fact, there are many organizations that have set up a quality improvement system successfully without the use of a formal model. But if you're someone that's like, I want a model that's kind of laid out, that tells me what I need to do and how I can implement that in my organization, then adopting a formal change model might be for you. So Lean Six Sigma is a hybrid between the Lean method, which focuses on waste reduction, and Six Sigma, which seeks to minimize defects based on analyses. So if you're someone that's really, or your organization is really focused on efficiency and how to maximize the resources that we have as much as possible, that might be an option. And then the results count is an equity strategy that prioritizes population level work, right? And it does this through differentiating and understanding whole population versus program population. And then really looking at and examining who are the most disadvantaged groups in relation to access to opportunities, right? So we see, now in current society that there's been an emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. So adopting this particular type of model may be something that you're interested in. So with this framework, results statements are really built representing an all kind of framing. So an example of that would be, all children within New York City will have food to eat, and then kind of building from there in terms of who are the most disadvantaged groups. So regardless of whether you choose a specific quality improvement model or not, it's really important to consider how your organization will benefit from the use of a quality framework, which Ruby will highlight next.
Thanks, Kerry. So quality framework can support the organization's mission and strategic vision to deliver the very best programs and services. This could be tracking fidelity to EVP, refining practices based on what the organization is learning through its quality improvement process, evaluating efficacy of approaches that are showing promising results and are driving better outcomes for individuals. Another way that an organization can benefit in its entire organization is also through its efforts in the finance department, right? Implementing quality efforts in your finance department can lead to successful audits as one marker. It can also create a structure where internal protocols and processes are consistently maintained and adjusted as needed across the organization. In human resources, so quality HR, what does this mean? So this can mean anything from equitable hiring practices to effective onboarding that is critical to promote retention, and also supporting professional development and career satisfaction, again, touching on all areas of the organization. All these factors help create a stable workforce, which leads to consistency in practice. Marketing and business development. Are we consistently tracking trends, adjusting our development to meet the needs of the community, or adjusting our marketing strategies to reach a community or to a targeted population? Quality framework here can build a structure for an organization to stay on top of changes that may require even diversification of their offerings. If they're seeing a reduction in their beds, should they go to outpatient, right? They should think about what the needs of those communities are and be able to get ahead of that. Information technology, as you all know, is more than infrastructure that stores and protects information. It is also about understanding, utilizing it to understand how we can leverage data. What are the inputs? Are we collecting the right data to drive quality improvement? What does our reporting capacity look like? Where can efficiencies be actualized so we can direct our energies to programming? And we're going to talk a lot about that in more detail throughout the presentation. And lastly here, I want to provide training, right? Training is an important part of something that benefits the entire organization. Providing training that is relevant, engages and promotes best practice. Training and learning is continuous. It's something that Rachel and Kerry had talked about, creating that culture of learning and growth. So critical. I hope that you can see that the quality framework can be part of organization's DNA. Quality is part of everyone's work, and sets the context for best practice?
So given that, and we've heard from Kerry a few models that you can use, we understand the importance of it, but how can your agency, no matter the size, whether it's a smaller agency, large, whatever, how can you create that culture of improving culture and performance that becomes almost embedded into your DNA of your organization? Well, I think every organization involves themselves in a strategic plan, and that is probably one of the best places to start. And one of the questions you might want to ask yourself is, how does your agency engage in its strategic plan process? And I'm going to take you through a little bit about what we do at our agency to give you some examples. And you want to ask yourself who's going to be involved, the board, leadership, staff at all levels, and what data do you use during that? And by data, I mean both internal and external. So our strategic plan occurs every 5 years, and it involves absolutely every layer of our organization, and it is open to every member of staff. And to give you an idea of size, we have around about a workforce of about 400 individuals, and all 400 of those individuals are involved. We use our data and subject matter experts, and sometimes we bring people in from the outside to act as subject matter experts. And what we do during that process is we review our client outcomes, we review our fiscal performance, our work processes, our staff performance, stakeholder satisfaction, everything that Ruby had just mentioned, as well as a whole host of other data from the previous strategic plan and the fiscal year. We then assess our mission and its fit to the current community needs. We're an organization that's over 130 years old, and so we do have to look at current climate. Things have definitely changed over those years, and we would be stuck if we remained how we were 100 years ago. So we look to see if there are any opportunities for increased mission impact. For example, in California, we have a very short-term transitional residential program called TSDF. And there was a huge need for this a couple of years ago. And so as an agency, we sought out that contract. But what we really did was we asked, does it fit with our mission? It did, and so we pursued it. From all of this, we create a new vision for our strategic plan, given the threats and the opportunities, both internally and externally within our industry. At 5 Acres, for example, we have 5 pillars, and these are our client impact, our workforce wellness, our fiscal vitality, our operational efficiency, and cause awareness. And so what we do is we develop during our strategic plan process measurable targets for each of our 5 agency initiative pillars under this new vision as the line of sight. And so every strategic plan, we look back and say, did it work? We review and adjust it each time to improve efficiency and impact. I don't know if you have seen a SWOT analysis before. There are hundreds of them online, and you can just Google them. But typically, SWOT assumes that strengths and weaknesses are frequently internal, while opportunities and threats are more commonly external. We found it useful to bring a SWOT analysis in during our strategic planning process, and we have all of our stakeholders complete one. And then we collate and we examine our results. And I'm going to now give you a few examples of what you and your agency might want to look at and explain what it is you'd be looking for. So under some of the strengths, this would be characteristics of your agency that give it an advantage over others. Examples that we have are, we have a private healthcare contract, we have a good reputation, but it can also all be things like human resources, staff, volunteer, board members, target population, physical resources, financial, activities and processes, programs you run, systems you employ, and even past experiences. The weaknesses are characteristics that place your agency at a disadvantage relative to others. We typically have a high turnover rate in Los Angeles. We're very short of LVNs, for example, and so that you can see how these two can play in. On the other side is opportunities and threats. Opportunities are elements in the environment that your agency could use. For example, for us, we don't provide services in every county. That would definitely be an opportunity. And one of the opportunities are we provide telehealth. Threats. These would be elements in the agency that could cause trouble to your business or agency. And an example of this currently is in our state of California. We have some legislature coming into effect, such as the Families First Act, and that is definitely something that will make us impact how we are going to serve our residential youth. But other examples of them might be future trends in our field or in the culture. It could be the economy, both local, national, and even international. It could be your funding sources from your foundations, your donors, etc. It could be your demographics are changing in your environment, changes in the age, the race, gender, culture of those who you serve. It could even be your physical environment. We have an incredibly old site. Is your building in a growing part of town, or is it the bus company cutting down routes? How easy is your site to be accessible? And also as well, legislation. Do new federal requirements make your job harder or easier?
You can start to see how quality is kind of interwoven into 5 acres after what Rachel just shared in terms of how they use their strategic planning process, the 5 pillars that they've come up with, and how they're kind of building in each of those areas. So when you're thinking about, quality improvement and establishing your framework at your organization or modifying it, you really want to think about, what do you need to implement that system, right? What resources do we have available for our PQI system? PQI is standing for Performance and Quality Improvement. Thinking about that in terms of staffing, do we have people internally that can fulfill these responsibilities around strategy development, around data collection and aggregation and analysis, or do we need to create these positions, right? And then what about our technology, right? Technology is so integral to the work we do, and even, as we've been in this pandemic, we've seen that kind of elevated to another level, which we'll talk about. But does our data management system support our quality efforts? And if not, or, thinking about what the limitations are of the systems that we have. And it's best to kind of get that out in the open and see, can we move forward even though we do have some limitations, or is this an opportunity for us to pivot to a new electronic health record, or time to start using an electronic health record to make some of this data collection easier? And then, Ruby touched on this, and Rachel also touched on this in terms of training, right? We can't stress enough how essential training is to helping staff understand what the organization is aiming to accomplish with the use of its data. How do we set the stage? How do we involve staff in this process so that they understand that the data that's being collected connects to the organization's overall mission or the initiative that we're prioritizing? So you really have to consider what training and resources those that are going to lead this effort in the organization may need in order to fulfill the role successfully, and how the organization is going to provide support in that effort. So building on that, when you're developing a PQI system, you really need to think about the structure of that system. So in that particular way, it's important to think about, how quality improvement is going to be infused throughout the entire organization, and that it's something that should be infused into the organization's daily functioning, right? So you really want to think about how each department will explore and examine data that's relevant to their work. And so this is where you're really going to need to determine what the structure of data review and analysis and discussion will be. Is it something that's going to be, at the department level? Is it something where we're going to convene a larger group? So is each department going to review and discuss quality improvement individually? Do we want to have a committee that includes representatives from all or as many departments and programs as possible to review PQI data? There really isn't one way to structure your system. So you just want to ensure that it's something that meets the needs of the entire organization, that it supports that culture of improvement, and that it includes dialogue and decision making as part of that process. So your PQI structure is really going to outline how information is shared and communicated within the organization and outside of the organization related to PQI activities. So as I mentioned, this is where you're going to have to determine, do we want to have a separate PQI committee? Do we want to have multiple committees by location or service and program area, or we actually don't want to have a separate committee at all? If you're a large organization and spread out across the state or multiple states, having a formal PQI committee, with cascading or smaller committees or teams that report to that larger committee may be ideal. This type of structure allows for different regions or different states to handle their PQI matters related to their specific area, but also have an opportunity for all groups to connect with one another and share experiences and learn from what others are doing in different parts of the organization. If your organization is smaller, building PQI into meetings that already exist may be ideal to maximize your resources. In this case, if you already have a leadership team meeting that's kind of set up, even if it is, 2 to 3 people, or we meet every week to check in, just add PQI to the agenda of that. You don't necessarily have to feel pressure to create a separate committee to do this work. You really want to think about what's going to be sustainable to your organization. And Rachel's going to provide an example of their PQI structure in 5 Acres.
So Kerry mentioned, how can we incorporate data into our everyday? How do we at 5 Acres incorporate a PQI? We do have a monthly PQI. Actually, I should say we did have a monthly PQI. We've actually increased that recently because of COVID-19. But typically we would have a monthly PQI meeting, and that includes every member of leadership in all the departments. So for us at our agency, we don't have a specific committee per se. We have an expectation that every member of leadership is part of that PQI meeting, and that meets every month. In this meeting, we discuss risks to the agency, and they can be from both programs and also supports. For example, from supports, we would discuss risks in the IT world. I'm thinking of like cybersecurity in QA. That would be documentation, auditing, client progress, financial, where we are with regards to the budget, fundraising and grants, HR, staff wellness, turnover, days to fill positions. Facilities, our plant structure, we are residential after all, and training in both compliance and training needs. And we also as well look at our programs as well. And in our PQI meeting, we look at every department at least once in a real in-depth meeting. From that, we look at any needs that arise within that one department, within that one area. And we propose solutions or a quality improvement project gets developed from that. And from there, goals are initiated and then results evaluated, and it comes back to PQI again to see, are we on track? So one of the reasons why I kind of look upon this as almost like this flow, each one building on the other. You have your data, you make a change, you look at your data, do you need to make a change again? Where do we get all this data and information from? Well, not only do we have our monthly PQI meeting that sort of looks at a much more of a larger picture, we have our smaller department meetings, and they're going to meet regularly. And then what happens is their data is then brought up to leadership on a consistent basis. For example, our clinical supervisors have got a monthly clinical meeting where they go in depth every quarter about their data for their clients, such as their outcome measures, CAMS, clinical audit tool, etc. And they also as well then themselves meet regularly to have a look in real time at their data to see how their clients are doing. And then what we'll do is we'll bring all of that data up into our regular PQI meeting. And what we do is we hope to create this continual feedback loop that helps us as an agency not only stay on track, but also will continually have a look at our needs and be able to alter them and shift so that we can provide the best quality that we can.
And so from here, kind of building in terms of establishing a quality framework, you really have to think about who the stakeholders are. So as Rachel kind of touched upon, like the leadership has their responsibilities, and then there's also work that's done at the smaller department levels, right? And how that may funnel up to the leadership team members as needed, when needed. So it's important to think about as you start to build your structure and that PQI work is underway, how the different stakeholders your organization engages with are going to be involved in providing and receiving data. So 3 or more of the common stakeholder groups includes, individuals, children, youth, and families, and communities, your staff, right? And then funders and regulators, right? So consider how the organization might meet and exceed the needs and expectations of key stakeholder groups, right? And the relationship between the worker and the individual served is really essential to positive outcomes. So your organization must evaluate the needs of staff and persons served separately in order to assess what's going to be important to each group, since they have different roles and different purposes, right? And you heard Rachel talk about having a staff wellness kind of focus. These are things that you want to think about in the organization that's going to be helpful, along with having a separate pillar that focuses on program impact. So thinking about, what are those key stakeholder groups in our organizations and how do we engage them in these activities? So that's going to include thinking about what metrics are really going to be beneficial to share with individuals, youth, and families served. And sometimes that can even include convening smaller groups of individuals served to explore options if that's valuable. Many times people may ask, what do I provide to the individuals that we work with, the children and youth that we work with? And sometimes it's helpful to ask, and that can be part of the quality improvement work that you do in the organization. So it's important to think about how each department will use data-driven mechanisms to advance their goals and the organization's mission. So you have to ask, what are the key areas to measure? Metrics should be identified for all programs and departments that are indicative of quality and service delivery processes. So that's going to include looking at individual outcomes of those that you serve, satisfaction, both at the staff level as well as the level of the individuals you work with, service delivery processes, which I touched upon, finance, right, and then risk as another area. And some of these examples that I'm talking about here, Rachel also talked about in terms of areas that her organization focuses on as well. So all your programs really do need to identify metrics that are going to be reflective of the interventions that are used in the work with individuals and families. So I don't know if you're at the point where you're starting to feel a bit overwhelmed with all of the information that Rachel, Ruby, and I are sharing with you. So if you start to think about all of the metrics that each department and program should measure, it can probably start to feel overwhelming, right? And so you start to ask that question of, do we have to measure everything? So how would you go through the process of determining what's important for your organization to measure? This connects back to ways in which you define quality for the organization. So if we're prioritizing equitable outcomes, then our metrics are going to be thematic and connect to this important initiative. Similarly, as Rachel talked about having 5 pillars that her agency is focused on, a lot of the metrics may be connected to work in those particular areas, right? So you want to find a way to kind of center the things that are going to be really important and relevant to your organization and the mission and what you're trying to accomplish. So try to find a balance between funder-driven measures that may be required for you to collect and monitor as part of contracts or grants that you receive, and measures that's going to be really important to your organization and connect to your mission, vision, and values. Now, sometimes there's synergy in both of those things, and then sometimes there's not, right? So where you can continue to advance the things that are important to your organization, that's going to be really helpful and key. And the logic model may be a helpful tool in streamlining what your programs measure that connect to larger program impact.
Right. Kerry asked the question, do you have to measure everything? And I think how much data an agency could acquire if it really set out to, and it would almost become meaningless. You would just have such data overload. So you want to really think efficiently on how, or rather what you're going to measure. And I believe that one of the nicest ways to do that if you're just starting out is to really start with your strategic plan. In some ways, that's going to kick you off with regards to what it is you're going to measure. There's going to be some things, right, that you know that you have to provide information on, and that would be a contractual obligation. There are some contracts that actually require you to collect data on your outcome measures, for example, of assessing the progress of your individuals and your families receiving services. Other things as well that would help you to start off not only just your strategic plan, your contractual obligations, but also your mission statement. Have a look at your mission statement and can you put that into a measurable term? And then also those staff surveys, asking staff and figuring out where you are. Some questions to ask yourself might be, what is relevant? What is going to help your agency to progress? Because there's a lot of stuff that you can measure, but is it really important? Is there something that you can do with the information? There is absolutely no point at all, and we'll talk a little bit about this later as well. But there's nothing worse than collecting data just for the sake of having data. If you have data, you should be able to do something about this. So what did we do? Well, we looked at our mission statement, which, as you know, is to promote safety, well-being, and permanency for children and their families by building on their strengths and empowering them within communities. So let's take a look now at how some of that data might look. And here is our permanency data. This helps us to see if we're on track. This helps us to understand our mission statement. Do our children leave us living with permanent, loving families or not? And so for us, the data is for us as an agency as a whole. We can see the trend over the fiscal year for each month. We can from this, we can see whether we're on track or not. So we are able to really drill down as well to different programs and departments. You can look at it from an agency perspective for all of the programs. Do we as an agency provide a safe, permanent, loving family for our children to go to? And you can then drill it down even further. Say you want to look at one of your community-based programs or say a residential program, and you can set yourself a bar for your different types of programs depending on the need of that program. Now, an alternative way to look at this as well, and I'm going to show you that, is one of our programs and one of our support departments, rather. And here we can see something that you might want to measure for a support department, and this is to do with your turnover rate. We as an agency work really hard, and I'm sure all of us do, to keep our employees. A lot of investment goes into training them, and when a staff leaves, that's a huge challenge for the agency, not only to rehire the staff, but also on the training to get that staff up to speed. It's a huge investment during somebody to get them at that point where they're working. And so as an agency, we want to keep our turnover rate low. And we would want to know, do the strategies that we have put in place as an agency, are they working? In other words, do some of the things that we have put in place for staff retention, have they got feedback or not? And this is why measuring is so important, because if we didn't know what we were putting in place, how would we know whether we're keeping our staff or not? You might want to set yourself a target, and you can see that we have set ourselves a target of around about 25%. Don't be too optimistic. We would never get to zero. It's impossible to get to zero. So you want to set yourself a target. How do you determine what to set? Again, this is in our PQI meeting. So we're going back now to our PQI meeting that we're meeting every month. And from here, we're all agreeing, yes, staff turnover is really important, not just for one department, but across the agency. And we determine from that what should be a good baseline. How do we determine that? Well, we look at what other agencies have. We look at SHRM. We look to see what is a typical good turnover rate, and are we above it or below it, and how can we mark ourselves in comparison to those individuals? And so from here, you can see that any of your projects that your agency engages in order to keep staff, to retain them, is working or not. And then you can begin to look at your trend over time. And on this graph, we happen to have a trend that shows the turnover rate decreasing over time as we begin to put into measures to keep staff.
And in order to promote the culture of learning environment, processes should be built in to support departments and programs in developing metrics that are important and relevant to their work, including how to collect and interpret the findings, right? So those responsible for aggregating the data and compiling the reports should work closely with the departments to which the data is relevant to contextualize it and ask critical questions that provide the basis for fruitful discussion and interpretation. So most importantly, creating an environment where everyone is working as a team to find solutions brings that process of learning and growth to life. So you saw that in the examples that Rachel shared in terms of, we're working on this as a team. We've decided, this isn't specific to one program. This is our entire organization, and we're prioritizing this, and we're looking at strategies of what we can put in place to support turnover or decrease turnover rates, and look at that uniformly. That's really what we're kind of talking about here, is really thinking about how do we organize the information that we want to see from a data perspective, and then come together as a group to look at it, ask questions of it, poke holes in it, say if something doesn't seem like it's accurate, or if we're unclear of what this is asking or showing, we're talking about it as a group and figuring out what's our next steps. That really is the heart of quality improvement, and you can see why it goes hand in hand with having or establishing a process for learning and growth.
So I think it's important, though, to mention that when you start to examine the data in your agency, a lot of feelings might surface amongst staff. It's really important to trust the process and frame what is being reviewed and why. And we spoke a little bit about how you needed the buy-in from everybody. Because when you do look at your data, especially if your data is not wonderful, then it is easy for staff to feel a little bit nervous about that. People might worry, does this mean my job is on the line? What is this? I don't want to air my dirty laundry out. And really what you're trying to do is to foster healthy curiosity for the information that emerges. So for us, I remember many years ago when we began to look at our data, and staff absolutely hated it. We heard things like, my clients love me, I don't need to measure that. And our response would be, well, how do you know? And also as well, is that your goal? I mean, is our goal to be loved, or is our goal for our clients to decrease their symptoms? And it's hard to kind of reveal how you're truly doing. We all want to present in such a positive light, but in order to improve, you have to look at the data, and you have to look at it through that lens of curiosity. And, sometimes people might say, well, why do we have to measure so much? But really, if you were to think about it in terms of, say, weight loss and measuring, if you went to a clinic and the doctor didn't weigh you, you'd think that was awfully strange. Or if you wanted to lower your blood pressure, you'd expect it to be measured, right? And the same is true for organizations. If we're expecting our turnover to drop, then we have to measure it. If we expect our children to move into permanent homes, then we need to measure that too. And if we expect our clients to improve in their mental health, then we need to measure that. But it's hard because it means that, like I said, you have to reveal how you're doing. And there is a fear of being judged on that. And so I really would emphasize the importance of trying to foster this healthy curiosity. And it really comes from the very beginning as you're setting your goals in your strategic plan, to have the whole buy-in to say, absolutely, this is what we want to look at, so that when we do look at it, people know they know that this is happening. They know it's going to be coming. So for example, if we were to say measure your CANS outcomes and compliance, then being curious about why your compliancy data is so low is important. Rather than just brushing it under the rug, you want to ask, well, why is it so hard to collect this data? What's happening during the session? Do our clinicians know not only how to administer the test, but how to bring it up in the conversation with the client? And I could go on and on about this here from a clinical perspective, but my bottom line really is you need to get the buy-in. So you need to get the buy-in from your team of viewing the data as being important rather than just something to measure for measuring's sake. Because if you don't have that buy-in, then you're setting yourself up for disaster. Once you've all agreed this is important, and then you can start to be curious about it.
So, having this PQI framework that we've been discussing, it also keeps us adept at change, right? When things are happening, we're better prepared to address those things that are out of our control, like natural disasters and pandemic, and things that may be more within our control. So for some examples, we're going to need to get creative in our response to these natural disasters and situations such as the pandemic, as we've all done in the past year and a half. But we have a foundation when we have a PQI framework that's laid in place to manage and jump off of. Understanding the trends, we can also be prepared to address increase in the needs of the community during and post once the immediate crisis response has been settled. We're going to see increases in the use of mental health services, post natural disasters, pandemic, and so that also looking at data also allows us to be prepared in how we can address those increases and need for access. And as you all know, when we've had to pivot, organizations have to continue to serve individuals as their needs do not go on pause, right? I mean, we need to continue to be there. Another example, the loss of contracts or grants or change requirements by funder regulator. It's something that Rachel also touched on. A good example is the Family First Prevention Service Act. It relates to residential, as it particularly relates to residential care, such as the QRTPs, the Qualified Residential Treatment Programs. This requires changes in admission and treatment, and states must adhere to these regulatory requirements to receive federal 4A funds, and these requirements are then passed on to organizations. So the organizations have to, move along with this change as well. And when we're talking about something that's maybe a little bit more in our control or program specific, like critical incidents and staff turnover, we talked about the different things that we can do to, when you look at data, how you may keep monitoring the staff turnover, such as what 5 Acres does. But is there a particular day of the week when we're talking about critical incidents where critical incidents are escalated? Is there a time of day that critical incidents are escalated? Is it in the evening time? And so what can we do when we understand our data? What can we do about understanding what those precipitating events are that may need to be addressed or improved upon? Do we need to shift staffing? So, having these structures in place really allow us to be adept at all kinds of types of changes that can occur for an organization.
So Ruby just mentioned about being adept at change. And one of the things that I want to use as an example within your PQI structure would be something that you as an agency had to move swiftly for during a pandemic. And that was, of course, when we all moved to remote work. Now, one of the things that for us as an agency, we have already now moved to remote work. However, we're aware that we know the number of cyber attacks has increased for everyone, not just for agencies, but indeed it's increased worldwide. We know that everybody has more phishing attacks placed on them as agencies and more increases in their malware. So this came into our PQI. We are aware, and you can see here in the need or the event, the pandemic has started, everyone's moved to remote work. We know that the number of phishing attacks, the number of phishing attacks that have gone through have increased. So what kind of data do we want to do? Because as an agency, we want to keep ourselves low at risk. So what sort of measurements do we want to have? We're going to look at the number of phishing emails that that staff are clicking on. We know that we can't control the number of phishing emails that we get. We can, however, control the social engineering aspect of it. We can control whether staff click on it or not. And we recognized during our PQI meeting that this risk began to become elevated. We noticed that we had more and more staff clicking on emails with a link. And so we as an agency recognized that we not only did we have to measure it, we then had to train out on it. We increased our training in cybersecurity. We also increased our HIPAA high-tech committee frequency. We used to meet once a month. We now meet once a week. And this is an example here of something where you will have moved quickly and you recognize that suddenly there is a new risk to your agency, how you can measure that quickly, and then also as well what you can do about it to mitigate it.
And so here is some data metrics that we are just beginning right at the start. We have a baseline. We are measuring the number of phishing attacks that have gone through to the agency. That will tell us if our firewalls are working. It will give us direct feedback, how well that is doing. And the other one is what we're doing is we're looking at our phishing test emails, and we introduce something to be able to work with staff on our cybersecurity to see how many of them they began to click. And so what we'll do is we will report out on this data every 6 months in our PQI meeting. And from there, we will determine what kind of trainings need to be done. So they'll build on each other. So another example of how you might want to use your data with your program departments, and here we can see a little bit based on everything that we've talked about in this presentation. We know that audits are contractual. You will recall that in an earlier slide when we were asking, well, what should we measure? Your contractor determines this. So we can now see, again, how we collect data based on that and how we use it then within the agency, within our PQI. You can see that we have the audit comes in. We want to improve our audit results. We know that we measure our internal audits of our charts from our QA department, from our peer review, and then we use that data in PQI. We display it in our clinical audit tool, and we'll see that in just a little bit. And those results are shared with the clinical team once a month. Those results are then shared with the clinical supervisors, and the clinical audit then is also shared by the QA director to the entire leadership. So you can see how everyone then becomes involved in that. And then the way that we look at it to say what kind of mitigation do we need to do, we then have focused trainings in areas of weakness. And you can see then that we measure our progress over time in those 4 key performance indicators for our clinical audit. And this is something that we've been doing now as an agency for years. And what it does is it's almost like taking the thermometer of the temperature of our charts. And that is our direct way of being able to say how well or what kind of the level of care that we're providing to our clients. So we're almost taking measurements and looking at them on a quarterly basis. And over time, we see this flow occur within the agency where we're able to, we notice that something's dipping, we begin to provide training in that area, we expect it to increase. If it doesn't increase, what do we do about it? We change plans, we shift, we talk about it, we put another action in place, and then we begin to see it rise again. So this really is how we kind of use our PQI meetings, how we use every meeting within the agency to kind of use data hand in hand so that we can change and act really swiftly.
Rachel provided some great examples in the context of programming and at the administrative level. In order for the organization to adjust how they respond to phishing attacks or improve clinical audits, they had to solidify a tracking mechanism to routinely look at the data. So there are several ways you can monitor the PQI measures you establish across different departments and programs. One mechanism we'll highlight is the use of logic models at the program level. You can also use factor analysis to understand the data and examine the trends that you're seeing critically as well. So a logic model is a visual representation of the scope of a program's services, from the resources that goes into it to the intended impact of service provision on the individual served. So I really do like to say that a logic model is both a process and a product. Process in terms of coming up with the critical areas that we are going to examine in our programs, and a product in terms of it being a visual roadmap that provides a snapshot into what the program's focus is and overall aims. So the logic model allows the program to identify all of its associated resources and how their work with individuals and families ultimately connects to the organization's mission and strategic vision. So the four components of the logic model are inputs, activities, outputs, and outcomes. Your inputs are what goes into the program to make it run. So this is really the resources, as we mentioned, which can be staffing in terms of human resources. It can be the financial resources, grants, contracts that are allocated to a program, technology that supports the program, and training as well. Activities are really about thinking about what the program does with those resources, right? Do you provide trainings to people in the community, counseling, advocacy, building relationships? It really is thinking about who your program is expected to reach, whether that's individuals, youth and families, volunteers, or other organizations, or decision makers and legislators. The outputs really are the measurable, tangible, direct products in terms of the services that your organization or that program specifically is providing. In some ways, it can also be thought of as process indicators that demonstrate quantity and quality, such as some of the things that Rachel touched upon. Your outcomes are really your short-term, intermediate, or long-term results of those program activities. So what's the immediate results from attending or participating in your program? So it really is focused on individual level change. Here's an example of a completed logic model using a template that we have available for use. You can look at it closely when you have time, but you'll see that the purpose of this residential program is to provide comprehensive care to youth between the ages of 12 and 18 to help them strengthen their relationships with family and supports in the community. So we realize that their stay in the program is only temporary and must prioritize their work within their local neighborhoods. So the focus really is on getting them back into the community and doing activities that's going to make that happen. So you'll be able to kind of see what those resources are as far as staffing and training supports, and how that connects to the overall outcomes that are listed, which are 3 different outcomes. One around permanency, which Rachel touched upon in her example, is a big area that's a priority. We want to make sure that children have safe places to go home to. But also in terms of helping them increase their independent living skills and increase their coping mechanisms. So we have skills that's going to focus on those as measurements as well. So we're providing some helpful steps that you should consider when it comes to standardizing the use of logic models within your organization. So if you think that this might be something that you'd like to use across all of your program areas, it really speaks to the process aspect of completing the 4 major components of a logic model. And there's many logic model templates publicly available for use. You can use the Alliance COA template, a template from the Kellogg Foundation, or you can create your own if you'd like to. There's really no right or wrong there. So we're coming full circle. So we touched upon a lot of different salient aspects of creating the context for best practices, and some key examples of what that could look like in practice. So hopefully, you have your creative thoughts and ideas are percolating in your mind of strategies you may want to bring back to your organization that we discussed here, and you're as excited as we are about the endless possibilities of using quality to promote a data-driven and learning and growth organization. So to summarize, here are the major steps to be taken when establishing a quality framework. that'll cultivate what best practice looks like in your organization. So from developing an organization-wide PQI plan to sharing data with relevant stakeholders, some of the key takeaways here is really thinking about how that connects back to your organization and, what you're setting out to accomplish. And so don't be afraid to kind of bring, your unique perspective into that work, and bringing others into the table to have that discussion as a collective team.
I just want to emphasize too, we had talked about earlier, don't become overwhelmed with trying to create a quality framework. Start small, find the champions in your organization that want to really try to improve practice. You know who they are. They come to you with bright ideas, and continue to refine your data. Your data is never going to look right in the beginning. So you continue to refine it, continue to think about what those inputs are, and just continue to work towards setting the better context for best practice. Here's a list of resources if you're interested in delving more into what we've discussed and some opportunities to improve best practice. And we just want to say thank you for joining us. We hope this has been really fruitful and helpful to your organizations. We really enjoyed doing this. We want to thank University of Maryland and really just thank the Training Institutes for allowing us to talk about building a quality framework and PQI. And again, just many thanks to Rachel McClements from 5 Acres for really just livening up our presentation in terms of what's really going out there in the field. Thank you.